my dad always secured a coveted tournament bracket that was printed on, it was more than a poster. This thing must have been 4 feet wide by 6 feet long, and we taped it up on the wall, and it was sponsored by Eckridge Meats. And every location, every tournament location, and the number of teams was a part of that bracket. And he would call them out and we'd write them down. Man, that was great.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And that's why this episode is more of a story rather than a conversation. And these are going to be stories of men talking about their dads, talking about moments with their fathers. And for some beautiful reason, these precious moments live with us for our entire lives. They impact how we think of our dad, and maybe even impact how we think of ourselves. And maybe if we're fortunate, we can pass on those traditions to the next generation. So happy Father's Day to all the pops out there. Thank you for doing the best that you could. Wyrd araed. So this is Chris, and one of the memories I have from my dad is actually something that persists through the generations. I feel really fortunate and blessed to have this. It's playing chess. So way back machine, when I was very young, we lived in San Antonio. And in San Antonio, there was a zoo. And in that zoo, there was a machine. And what that machine did was, if you delivered a quarter and turned the crank, you would get a wax figurine of an animal, either red or black. Lions, giraffes, rhinos, antelope, gorillas, the works. Every time we went to the zoo, which was a lot, my dad would get these animals out of the machine. And then one day, he brought us out back, and there was a 3-foot by 3-foot chessboard. It was covered with tin and copper tiles. And on that chessboard were the wax figurines. The male lion was the king, the female lion was the queen, the rhinos were the rooks, the knights were the gorillas, the giraffes were the bishops, and the antelopes were the pawns. And we played chess. Now, I was 3 years old, so I didn't know a lot. But we took that chessboard with us when we moved to Pittsburgh when I was 5. And we played chess. And then the moments that I had with my dad on the weekends, we would play chess. I remember very clearly being 7 or 8 or 9, sitting on the carpet, drinking a Coca-Cola, and playing chess with my dad. And I felt at the time that that was something really important for him to be with me, and it was important for me to be with him. Just hanging out, playing chess. And when I was younger, I'd get into a pickle, so we would switch the board. So I would switch sides, right? When I got older, we didn't need to do that, but it was wonderful. And I then bought a chessboard when my girls were 5, and we played chess too. We had wonderful games, and we did pickle so that we would switch it up. But we continued to play chess, and they're in their mid-20s and we still play chess. I play chess with my daughter when she visits from out of town. I play chess with my daughter when she's close by. And a handful of years ago, when my dad visited, he got to play chess with my daughter. It's a funny thing when you have something that you can do with your dad that you can give to your children and pass that on. And I hope that my children, my daughters, will play chess with their children too and carry that on in the legacy of my pop of playing chess with your child. I love you, Pop. Thank you for that.
So a particular memory I have of my father started when I was about 10 years old. My dad always had a passion for British cars. He loved them as a kid, and he kind of instilled that passion in me. And he found an old Jaguar, a 1962. It's called a Mark II, and the thing was a disaster. It barely ran, and I went with him to go pick it up. And the seats were all torn, and it was rusty, and it was, and I remember leaving the place that he bought it from, looking in the rearview mirror, and I could no longer see the prior owner because of the smoke pouring out of the back of the car. And I remember teasing my dad about how it was kind of like James Bond, and he had just hit the smoke button to get away. And then I continued the teasing all the way home about this car that was just basically smoking up the entire town that we lived in. And then time started to go by, and that car was in the garage. And my dad worked on it every day. He was very passionate about it. And he rebuilt the entire thing from the ground up. And it turned into one of the most beautiful cars. And we would take it to shows together, British shows, which he would win. And then later in life, when I married my wife, my father took us to the chapel and from the chapel in that car. And so it's kind of a beautiful ending, the car that started as my youth. And it was an example of my dad's perseverance and the way it turned into something beautiful. And then it made the event. It was a really instrumental part of the wedding, us all leaving in this beautiful classic Jaguar.
Chris, this is Doug Wagner. A story I'd like to tell about my dad. Probably I was in my, late single digits, I'll say, 8, 9 years old, and born and raised in Indiana, where basketball, including high school basketball, approaches something approximating religion. So everyone here obviously loves the game, or maybe not so obviously. But I sure did, and my dad did. And at the end of the high school basketball season, and at that time, the state championship tournament was single class. So no matter how many students attended a school, you were all thrown into one big pile, and the tournament was winner takes all. Think of the movie Hoosiers. So anyway, I want to say it was a Friday night when the draw was made for seeding of the tournament in sectional locations like Lagodi, Indiana, or Marion, Indiana, or where I lived, South Bend, Indiana. And it was just a religious-like event. There's no other way to describe it. So my brother and I would go downstairs with my dad. We had a huge aerial antenna on our roof, which of course was pre-cable television. That's how we got our television reception. My dad had rigged it up so that we also could tune in radio stations from Chicago and Grand Rapids and other places around South Bend. But most importantly, we were able to tune in Joe Pate from Tournament Central in that scary metropolis of Indianapolis, who ran down all 300 plus high schools, who they were playing, what the location of the sectional was, when they would be playing. It took hours. And to accompany that, my dad always secured a coveted tournament bracket that was printed on, it was more than a poster. This thing must have been 4 feet wide by 6 feet long. And we taped it up on the wall, and it was sponsored by Eckrich Meats. And every location, every tournament location, and the number of teams was a part of that bracket. And he would call them out and we'd write them down. Man, that was great. Such an incredible memory. Hopefully I've passed it on to my daughter. She and I like to go to basketball games together.
Hey, this is Lars, and my favorite story that I like to share about my dad actually isn't just one experience. It was something that we did multiple times when I was a little kid. He had a friend who was a teacher. He was a science teacher, and another teacher who had a boat in Marina del Rey, and we would get up on weekends early in the mornings and drive down. At the time, we lived up near Thousand Oaks, and we'd drive through LA and go down to Marina del Rey and go fishing. And I remember it was always, 5 o'clock in the morning, waking up, and Dad, shaking me and saying, "Hey, let's go fishing." And then the ride down early in the morning, and then we'd stop at this diner and have breakfast, and then go out and go fishing, and just how many mornings of just great father-son time on the water and catching fish. And I remember just all the different adventures that we had with that, between catching halibut and rock cod. And one time I caught a manta ray, which of course we sent back. But it was a great experience. And I just always remember fondly going, just those memories of getting out and being on the water, and just, I don't know, there's that special time that you get, father-son bonding, where you're out, and fishing just seems to be one of those things that's common amongst that kind of experience, and it's something I'll always remember. I always think back to those mornings and those times when we were doing that, and remember them fondly.
This is Eric, and one of my memories of my dad was that he got me started with skiing. I don't exactly remember how old I was when I skied first, but I do remember that around 9 or 10, I believe it was, my dad took my brother and I to a ski store, and we bought skis, brand new skis. Hagen, I think they were. Anyway, the purpose of the ski purchase was to support a surprise trip to Aspen. And he and his wife and my brother and I flew to Aspen for a week of skiing. It was a pretty dramatic trip. We had our own skis, and we flew through Denver, and I guess there was a really bad storm or something, but our way to Aspen was blocked. But my dad was determined, and I just remember that he got us like on a charter flight on a little plane from Denver into Aspen, and the hotel had an indoor pool, but it was indoors because of a giant kind of inflated bubble over it, and it was connected to the hotel. I kind of remember that. You go in there, it was all steamy and hot in there in this big bubble. It was freezing outside. It's a pretty neat memory of us going into that pool and my dad swimming with me and my brother. And then we spent the week skiing in Colorado. Like I guess it was what really cemented skiing for me. I ended up skiing throughout my life, and when I left high school, I was able to ski while I was in college here and there, and then on trips, like various trips. One time I was in Europe and I was able to go skiing, and it was very much because my dad had got me introduced to skiing. And I suppose I took a little time off from skiing when I was, getting started in the world. But I got back to it, and then when I had my daughter, I was keen to have her learn. And she skied for the first time when she was 5 years old. We were at a little hotel resort, and they had their own ski hill, of all things, with a T-bar. Anyway, we got my daughter onto skis that first time, and it was the start of one of these things that she and I do by ourselves. It's kind of an activity for the two of us, and she's been skiing ever since. And of course, as time goes on, it gets to a point where she's able to take the car and go ski with her friends without her dad. But I guess that's the point, isn't it? And to this day, though, we still find time to ski with one another. And she's an independent skier, and I have little doubt that she'll teach her children to ski also. So that's a skill that my dad intentionally kind of passed on to me, and that I've intentionally passed on to my daughter. Unfortunately, my dad and my daughter never really had a chance to ski together because of his stroke, but it's a great life skill to have. A lot of neat memories with my dad, and even more neat memories with my daughter, because of what you taught me, Dad. Thanks very much, and I love you, Dad.
Hi, this is Andrew, and I'm going to share some memories about my dad. The happiest memories for me with my dad were on Saturday mornings and school holidays sometimes, where I used to work alongside him in his chemistry laboratory. He was a scientist. My dad was kind of obsessed with science, and particularly chemistry, and our home was always filled with chemistry books everywhere at his desk and dinner table. And he'd always make us go to the Science Museum every few weeks in London to explore the latest exhibit and things like that. He had a real passion for science. My dad could not afford to go to college when he was 18, so it didn't really stop him from pursuing science. He taught himself chemistry. He built a career in the field and later did a part-time chemistry degree while raising 3 kids and balancing family life, which I think is a major accomplishment for him. So some of my fondest memories are from when he used to take me to his laboratory at work. So his lab was very busy. It was very smelly. There were chemical smells everywhere. And the laboratory sort of opened up into this big, massive foundry. So he was a metallurgist. He did the chemistry of metals, basically. So in the foundry, there were people pouring molten metal, cutting up metal, that kind of thing. So it's really exciting being in that environment. But just watching him work on his chemistry experiments filled me with great pride and admiration as a kid. And he'd work on these experiments, then he'd pass me the dirty chemistry glassware for me to clean. That was my job, basically. And he paid me the grand total of 50p every morning, which I guess was a lot of money for a little kid, but maybe it was a bit cheap. But anyway, I didn't care. I really enjoyed it. I was having a great time. So one of the proudest moments was eventually that I became a scientist as well. And my dad was able to be there for my first ever presentation that I gave at a chemistry conference. It was it was a biochemistry conference. It was a full circle moment that underscored the values of perseverance and the love of science, and which he instilled in me. So obviously, although I think chemistry is important, if my kids want to pursue it, that's great. But instead, I'll encourage them to find and follow their own passions, just like my dad did for me. Thank you very much.
A lasting memory of my dad was seeing him and how hard he worked to support our family. I remember my first job was going to work with him and my grandfather and my uncle doing commercial plumbing in the summertime. I never saw my dad complain about the heat or the harsh conditions, and that made a lasting impact on me. It's something that I try to pass on to my own children today. Happy Father's Day to him and all the fathers out there.
We'll be right back.
Well, good morning. It's June 9th, 2024, a week before Father's Day. My name is Peter Eby. I'm 53, and I'm not really where I should begin regarding my father. He was a gentleman. He was a kind man. He loved to fly airplanes. I often talk about how lucky I was to see him have a job that he loved, because he passed that on to me. He loved going to work. And then when he was home, he was super happy to just be home. Work for him meant flying for United Airlines. And that meant that he was sometimes gone for a day, 2 days, 3 days, sometimes even 4 days from home. He would get up very, very early and leave our house in Crystal Lake, Illinois, about 45 minutes, an hour from O'Hare. And then he would be gone, basically flying from place to place to place to place to place. Sometimes 3, 4, 5 flights in a day. And, it's funny now that I think back on it, I never knew exactly where he was. He didn't sit down with me the night before he left and say, I'm going from Chicago to Denver to Kansas City to Detroit back to Chicago. He never did that. But I never worried about it either. I never worried about him. I knew that he would always come back. And he always did. And one of the gifts of that job that he had was that we got to fly places. And we could fly, I don't know, to me it seemed like we could fly for free. I don't know if he actually paid any money for us going on flights or not, but we had this incredible perk of being able to walk into the airport and write we had a book of paper tickets that were blank, and we could just write down where we wanted to fly from and where we wanted to fly to and walk up to the gate agent and hand them the tickets. And I know that what we usually had was a plan and a flight that we wanted to get on as a family. And he would list us the day before. He would put us on a list. And basically, if there were enough seats on the plane after all the paying customers had boarded, then we could get on. And it was seniority based, so if there were other employees there who had been working for United longer, they would get first choice of seats. And the funny thing was, there were 5 of us: my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad, me. There were never 5 seats together after everybody had boarded, and we would all get split up. And I was the oldest, so I would always end up sitting alone, almost always. As my mom would sit with my sister, my dad would sit with my brother, typically. Or sometimes we got lucky and we were 3 and 2, something like that. Sometimes one of the only seats available was this jump seat that was in the cockpit, and he, being a pilot, could actually sit there. So if there were 4 seats in the plane and 1 in the cockpit, then the 5 of us could go. and he would sit up front with the pilots. It was a totally different time. It was a totally different world then than it is now to travel. The other thing that we would do is, we would have this plan to get on a flight. We usually targeted early flights, and because there were more likely to be empty seats, we would drive to this giant airport employee parking lot, and this old school bus that had been painted blue would drive around and pick us up, and we would just leave the car there, and it would take us to the terminal. Like, there was this special door that we would sit on this bus, and it would drive us over to the terminal, and we would get off, and they would let us in this back door, basically, and we would hike up into the terminal. Like, just imagine emerging, and you've probably seen these funny stairways in airports. The old airport, there were these funny stairways that seemed to come up out of nowhere. That's where we would come. We would just walk up these stairs and be in the terminal. We never went through security. And it boggles my mind now, but to then it was totally normal, And when we came back, the same thing. We would just get on that same bus and go back to the parking lot and get in the car and drive home. We were trusted, basically. So we had that perk, and sometimes it worked out perfectly. We got on exactly the flight we wanted, and sometimes it didn't work. The flight was full and we didn't go. Or sometimes there was this heartbreaking decision about, there's 3 seats, but 5 of us. Should some of us go and others wait for the next flight? With no guarantee that we would make it. And, we also had to meet a dress code. We could not fly as employees in jeans or tennis shoes. My dad would always wear a jacket. So we had to look nice. Flying was a big deal, right? It was an upper class privilege, so we also had to look nice. We were representing the company. And as a kid, I remember thinking, I didn't understand how other people could travel without this ability. I kept thinking how burdensome it must be to plan your trip well in advance and buy your tickets and show up on a specific day at a specific time and go, and not just figure it out a couple days beforehand or the night before or the morning of even. But over time, I did recognize how lucky we were. And later in life, when I was old enough to travel independently, but young enough to still be considered part of the family perk plan, I could travel alone. And I did. I traveled to Europe with my brother in college. I traveled to China. I traveled to all over the U.S. And it was a sad day when I aged out of the program, when I was finally an adult and needed to take care of myself. One day my dad says to my brother and I, I'm going to take you on one of my flights. I'm going to be the pilot and you are going to sit in the back of the plane. And that was very, very exciting to us. Because we'd been on a lot of flights with him where he was on the plane, but we had never been on a flight where he was flying the plane. And of course that made us very proud. He looked fantastic in his pilot uniform and his hat. We were pretty thrilled that it was our dad who was up there flying the plane. But he had a job to do, so we arrived early, and he sat us down. Well, he did his pre-flight check, and he had to walk around the plane literally and look at things, and then come in and do some other things. And he needed us to sort of be taking care of ourselves. And he put us in the cockpit. And this flight was from Chicago to Cincinnati. Not a long flight, but that was the plan. And he put us in the cockpit. He literally put us in the front 2 seats of the airplane. And I would guess that we were about, I think I was 13 and my brother was 10. So we were probably old enough to keep our hands to ourselves if we really, really tried hard, but young enough to have trouble resisting temptation. And you can imagine sitting in a cockpit where there's just buttons and levers and knobs everywhere, that temptation was fierce, to say the least. And we tried, but could not resist. And so we started playing with things. Anyway, it wasn't long. We weren't in there a long time, but okay, so my dad comes back, like, all right, we're ready to go. I want you guys to go back and sit in your seats. So we go back and sit in our seats. And people start getting on the plane. And the flight attendants know who we are, and they're taking good care of us. And giving us our little plastic wings. And, this was like 1983-ish. And everybody gets on. And it comes time to close the door. They close the door. It's time to leave. And we don't leave. The plane doesn't back up. And the pilot comes on. He says, sorry for the delay, folks. We're working on a little mechanical issue. And I'll update you shortly. And we're like, oh, whatever. 5 minutes pass, 10 minutes pass, 15 minutes pass. Like, we're not going anywhere. And, my brother and I, we're kids. We have nothing to do all day. It's not really a big deal to us. But, people start, to talk. And my dad comes on over the intercom. And he says something to the effect of, folks, I'm so sorry. We've been working on this mechanical issue, and our best people have been on it, but we are unable to resolve this today. And we unfortunately are going to have to cancel this flight. And I shit you not, they canceled the flight. And my brother and I kind of sitting there thinking, oh, that's too bad. I wonder what happened. I wonder why this flight got canceled. That's weird. I guess we're not going to Cincinnati. And so everybody else gets off. And my dad comes and gets us. He did not say anything. He never said, you broke the plane. He never said that. He never laid it on us. He never made us, he didn't yell at us. He didn't make us feel bad. He didn't guilt trip us, nothing. He just said, we will do this again. And the thing of it is that the way his flight schedule worked was that he would do the same batch of trips on a cycle for a month. And so we knew that in 1 week, the exact same flight would happen at the exact same time on the exact same Tuesday. And we're like, well, that's too bad. This was summertime. Like, we didn't miss school or anything, and we didn't have jobs, and we just went home. And a week later, we went back to do this again, and he did not let us sit in the cockpit. He did not let us sit in the cockpit. And and we were fine with it, right? We'd had our fun in the cockpit. I think we sat in first class even. It's like, here, sit in first class instead of sitting in the cockpit. And we went on our trip to Cincinnati, and we stayed with him. We stayed in a hotel overnight, and then we flew back the next day. And, that was like our trip with our dad flying the plane. And like I said, he never blamed us for what happened that day. And when I look back on it, I think he was certainly somebody who held himself responsible for many things that weren't his fault. And I certainly have carried that over. I have that trait from him. I blame myself for a lot of things that aren't my fault. But I think in that moment, in that situation, he knew that it was his responsibility, that he probably should not have sat us in that chair. And he was not going to blame us for failing to resist the temptation to touch all those knobs and buttons. But he learned his lesson because, like I said, when we went back the second time, he knew enough not to put us in that seat. Well, there's lots of other stories I could tell about my dad and his flying. The other things that I will add is that he was also flying a 747 on 9/11 from London to LA. and he was diverted to Canada in flight, en route, as 9/11 was going down. And I remember waking up that morning and turning on the news and seeing what was going on and wondering where my dad was. Because by that time I was 30, living in Seattle, and he was in San Diego. And I didn't know on a daily basis where he might be in the world. He could be anywhere in the world. And it wasn't something that we talked about all the time because I always knew he would come back. But later, found out that he had in fact been in the air, and he had been captain of the plane. And he had to make some tough decisions about what to do, not knowing really what was unfolding and whether or not there might be additional terrorists on additional planes, including his at the time. He used to tell me that flying was hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror, and the pilots were supposed to know what to do in those moments. And in that moment, turns out he knew what to do. So, I'm lucky to have had a guy who loved his job, who could handle those moments of terror. He wasn't perfect, nor am I. And I knew he loved me, and I loved him and have the deepest respect for him. He died in 2007, which is a long time ago now. He was only 65. And the FAA had made him retire at 60. And he didn't die because he wasn't flying, but he missed it. It was a hard transition for him to stop flying. We held a ceremony for him on an aircraft carrier because he had flown on aircraft carriers as a young man, which is still a miracle to me, to imagine landing a plane on the bouncing deck of a ship in the middle of the ocean. And he told me stories about trying to put a plane down on a piece of steel in the North Atlantic in the middle of the night, which must have been exhilarating and terrifying. Moments of sheer terror. So I miss him, and I wonder what life would be like for my mom and me and my kids who never got to know him. They were 3 and 1 when he died, so they really have no memories of him, which is unfortunate. I'm sure he would have loved to get to know them, and they would have benefited from knowing him. So, this Father's Day, I remember him. I'm grateful for him. Grateful for the things that he brought and provided for, and the care that he gave us. I love you, Dad.
We'll be right back.
Hey, Menfolk, how are you? My name is Mike Rosenthal. I was a guest on Menfolk Journeys with Chris, and I am giving a special Father's Day memory. Being 53 years old, I went through a rough patch where I didn't know my dad for about, I didn't see him much from probably age 7 to about 25. So there's a significant gap. But in my day, divorces were different. Unfortunately, in my case, my parents, or maybe not unfortunately, just as circumstance would have it, my folks split when I was a year and I think about 15 months old. Anyway, but when I was a kid, my dad lived in Steubenville, Ohio, which is probably about 45 minutes outside of Pittsburgh where I was living. And, I'd see him on the weekends or every other weekend. I don't really remember. I was pretty young for most of it. But I do remember that he would often take me to the Pittsburgh Zoo. More specifically, we would go to the aquarium at the Pittsburgh Zoo, where I developed a friendship, at least in my young mind, with this freshwater porpoise, Amazonian freshwater porpoise named Chuckles. So on the weekends that I would go to see Chuckles, I would bring a ball, or my dad and he'd take me to go get like an inflatable, like one of those Walmart bin balls, like in the netting, like the super cheap plastic one. And you could throw it over like the plastic thing, and Chuckles, being a super smart porpoise, would return the ball, and you could volley it with him or throw it back and forth endlessly. He really enjoyed it, and of course, playing catch with the porpoise, any 5, 6, 7-year-old would enjoy it as well. So there were multiple visits with Chuckles, but I remember the mood always being light, and that being just really good. And it's a very vivid, fond memory that I have with my dad early on. As fate would have it, we did reconnect at about age 25, and we've been thick as thieves ever since. So listen, it just goes to show, just even if you're, navigating choppy waters in a split or difficult divorce or parental custody type of environment, you never know. There's sometimes light on the other side of that dark passageway or choppy seas or whatever metaphor you want to apply. But anyway, Chuckles, my dad, and the volleying Walmart ball was something that will forever burn brightly upon the tablet of my heart. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're all doing well. Thank you.
I'm proud of so many aspects of my father's life, it's hard to focus on one. However, I'm going to talk about his professional career. Nowhere was it more evident that my dad was a man of integrity who fearlessly did the right thing and challenged the groupthink of the times. My dad was Raymond David White. He retired as a captain in the San Francisco Police Department. He began his career in 1946, graduating from the police academy. And at that time, there was the first African-American graduate, and no one would step forward to be his partner. My dad immediately did, and they became lifelong friends. The two were sent to clean up the roughest district in town, which still is, the Tenderloin. I wish they were with us now to do the same. Dad was a huge advocate of community policing. He built a bond with the community and was one of the founders of the PAL, the Police Athletic League, designed to help underprivileged youth develop a bond with the police and with a male figure in their lives. My dad was a cop's cop and was naturally elected head of the San Francisco Police Officers Association. He fought hard for the betterment and the conditions of the rank and file. In 1975, the rank and file voted to strike. My father was under enormous pressure to join his fellow officers on the strike. He was a cop's cop and a big advocate for them. However, he refused to join the strike, noting his oath as a public servant and his duty to the people of San Francisco. Dad was an innovator in many ways. He was chief of sex crimes detail in the 1970s, very busy time. Not wanting victims to encounter their assailants, Dad had a separate entrance and meeting areas where the victims could be heard without feeling threatened. Those are just some of the aspects of my dad's career that I have incredible respect for. He was a great man, great father, great devoted to my mother, and devoted to raising us 7 kids. Thank you.
So I guess I'm lucky in that I have a lot of great memories of my dad, and my dad's still alive, so shouldn't speak in the past tense. But we were very close all through my life, and it's been just a great thing for me to have in my life. I think bringing it all the way forward to today, and the fact that I'm the dad of a 5.5-year-old and a 3-year-old boy, I think one of the things that is a real touchstone for me is playing catch in the yard with my dad. Was a basketball, whether it was a baseball, with football, shooting baskets in the backyard, whatever that might be. I had those memories kind of seared in my brain, and I can see when I close my eyes, my dad's standing over on the patio and me standing in the middle of the yard and him throwing the ball to me and us throwing it back and forth over and over and over. And now today, I've got the same thing going on. My 5.5-year-old and the 3-year-olds try to join in too. But every night when I come down from finishing my workday upstairs in my office, I'm able to have my 5.5-year-old sitting there waiting for me to throw him pitches or play catch or whatever. And it's a really great thing for me to have that memory, that touchstone memory, and then to bring it forward to today with my child. I think one last thing on this, on I believe it was June 1st of 2014. I know that date because of various reasons, but on June 1st of 2014, I took my dad to a Dodger game on a Sunday evening. And one of the reasons I took him is because they had a scheduled catch on the field after the game, and he didn't know this at all. I just told him, hey, bring your glove to the game, which I guess was kind of a dead giveaway since I don't know the last time my dad brought a glove to a Dodger game, but he brought his glove. And at the end of the game, we lined up and we went out and through the center field fence onto the field. And I don't think my dad had ever been on the field at Dodger Stadium before. And that's one of our cathedrals in our life. We're not a religious family, but the Dodgers and Dodger Stadium is a big place for us. And we were able to play catch on that night. It was probably the first time he and I had played catch in like 25 years, to be honest, since I was like in my teens. So that's always going to be a special memory, and hoping one day to bring that all the way full circle and play catch with my boys, either there or, we live in Massachusetts now at Fenway, wherever it might be. So yeah, love my dad, love my boys, proud to be a dad, proud to be a son, and happy Father's Day.
This is Jeff. Many boys and men connect with their father through sports, whether it's tossing a baseball, going golfing, simply rooting for the same football team. For me and my dad, the sport that has connected us is skiing. My father was an avid skier throughout his life. He learned to ski when he was a young man, and until the past few years when various medical conditions forced his retirement from the slopes, he would take several ski trips each year to various resorts and go skiing, sometimes for the day, sometimes for a week. Even though he was an advanced skier, he would still sign up for ski lessons because he felt he can always improve his technique. When I was young, he took me and my brother up to Big Bear to learn to ski. He put us in ski lessons, and he also gave us lessons himself. We would take yearly ski trips with him as I was growing up. And even though he was a far advanced and much better skier than I was, he would always spend some time skiing with me or with my brother, or have all three of us ski together. As I got older, the ski trips became less frequent, but we would still go every so often, sometimes to Mammoth, still up to Big Bear, even a trip out to various resorts in Colorado. After I started my career and family, my father and I had not gone skiing together in many years, but we restarted the tradition once my son and my brother's daughter were about 5 years old. He took all of us to Snow Summit, put the kids in lessons, and again skied with them for a bit after their lessons and continued to give them lessons himself. While the kids were in lessons, my brother, my dad, and I skied together and just enjoyed our time together. After that, we would continue to meet up for skiing, sometimes just for the day. Sometimes it would just be me and him, sometimes me, him, my son, or sometimes me, him, and my brother. And he could still out-ski me until he was in his early 70s. Although he no longer skis, we still fondly recall and talk about our ski trips. Now, although my son and I do ski, the sport that connects us is running. I ran when I was young, but had stopped for many, many years. When my son was about 5 years old, I would take him to the park, but I would get winded very quickly as he ran and played. I figured if I could run a 10K or for about an hour, I could keep up with his playing at the park. So I signed up for a 10K and started training. As he saw me training, he asked if he could join me for a run. I said sure, figuring he would run about a quarter or half a mile and then want to do something else. But he ended up running a mile with me, and then after changing out of sandals into tennis shoes, an additional mile and a half. The weekend after I ran my 10K, we ran a 5K together. Since then, we have run many, many races together, 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, and even a marathon. My son ran in high school, and he now runs for his college team on the Division II level. Meanwhile, I continue to run and have expanded into doing ultra marathons. Although I have not been able to keep up with my son for a long time, he will still sometimes slow down and do a run with his old man. Most recently, last weekend, he paced me in the final part of an ultra marathon I did. We also talk about running a lot, whether it's about the top high school prospects, the top college runners and records they are breaking, or professional track marathon runners, and even top ultra runners. We share a deep love for this sport of running, and I anticipate it will continue to bind us in the future, as skiing does for me and my dad. I also look forward to seeing which sport my son will bond with his children over eventually, when and if he has them.
Hey there, folks. John Yerington here, and I wanted to take a moment to share a memory about my father, Bob. My dad was an electrical and mechanical engineer by trade, but to me, he was simply just Dad. As a youngster, I never associated what my father did for a living with his unique ability and aptitude to fix and or build anything. And I mean literally fix and or build anything. If Bob Vila and MacGyver had a love child, it would have been my father. My dad is one of those guys who has no fear when it comes to dismantling and reassembling a product. And as he disassembled something, he always knew what the parts were by name. He always understood how each individual part worked and how they functioned together. And he could easily identify what the problem is or the issue was with the product at large. Now, these were the days well before the internet, folks. We're talking way back in the wave machine, like 1980s, right? Well before you could literally watch an informative video on YouTube about anything. Tell me how to change my oil. Tell me how to rotate a tire. Tell me how to install a sprinkler system. You watch the video and you're good to go, right? Well, back in these days, you had to learn this stuff by trial and error and by asking around. These were the skills that manly men had who loved using their hands. They just knew how to do these things. This was also the era of small hardware stores where you were relegated to use what they had in stock at the time. You couldn't just run down to your local big box home and garden store, which literally has everything under the sun, right? And you certainly couldn't order something on Amazon for next day or same day delivery. Often with a simple set of tools such as a hacksaw, a soldering iron, a drill, a screwdriver, maybe a pair of pliers, I would watch my dad in the garage forge parts he couldn't find or buy at the store, from literally nothing to make a necessary repair on an item that we needed. When he wasn't busy fixing things, he was busy building things around the house from scratch, whether it be furniture like bunk beds or dining room tables, to outdoor stuff like playhouses, dog pens, patio covers, you name it. There was nothing this man couldn't build. In fact, in the childhood home I grew up in, I was one of 7 children and we had a large family, and therefore my parents decided we needed to extend the size of the house to accommodate this large and growing family. My dad, as an engineer, drafted all the plans for the room additions himself and submitted them to the city. And although he hired a construction contractor to assist him with the build, he did the electrical and the piping, and it was pretty amazing how much he was able to do. Every night after work, on the weekends, down on his hands and knees, getting his hands dirty. Now, while my dad is now in his mid-80s, he's still tinkering around the garage, still building things, still fixing things. He's a true hands-on guy, and I'll always remember him as a man who could fix or build anything. And for those of you wondering if this admiration I have for my father's ability to fix and build things was passed along to me. Sadly, I'm here to report it wasn't. I can't swing a hammer.
One of the best memories I have with my father, it actually involves alcohol. And I don't condone or endorse the abuse of alcohol, but I have to say this was a fairly defining moment in my experiences with my father. We happened to be in Mexico as a family. So my mother and sister were there as well. And my mother and sister decided to go off shopping for the day. And so my father and I were left to our own devices. I was 17 at the time. I was a senior in high school. And we subsequently, to enjoying lunch together, decided that we still had a bit of free time and that we would owe the universe, or the universe would owe us, for having divined what the best beer in Mexico is. So at the time, there was a fairly limited selection. This would have been mid-'80s. But nonetheless, we took it upon ourselves to throw ourselves onto, and for the betterment of humanity, throw ourselves onto the grenade and, take one for the team to determine what the best beer in Mexico was. So after, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 beers, we determined that beer, the best beer in Mexico at the time, was Pacifico. And yes, it did include Corona and Tecate and I think Bohemia and a couple of others. But nonetheless, it was a great opportunity to really bond and connect with my dad. And it wasn't so much about getting drunk. It was just the spirit of the moment and just really enjoying time together and doing something that otherwise my mother would probably not condone the behavior and the corruption of her one and only beloved son. But it was a great memory and something that he and I still fondly dredge up and reconnect over the years. A great memory of being a father, definitely when our kids were very young. Our son and daughter are separated by 21 months, not quite 2 years. So when we lived in Carlsbad, home to Legoland, I would take them regularly to Legoland, and in particular to a particular section of Legoland where they could just run amok. And there was a choke point at the entrance to this. I forget what it's called, but it was basically a gigantic jungle gym. Hundreds or dozens of other kids running around. And my buddy and I, who had twins of his own that are the age of our eldest, our son, we would sit at the mouth of that and just jibber jabber and arguably maybe drink the beers that we may have snuck into Legoland in the guise of cycling water bottles. So thank you, Lax, Legoland security. But we would sit there and our kids would run themselves ragged and scream themselves hoarse, and we really enjoyed that, as well as the other amenities to Legoland. So that was a really good memory. Our kids still fondly recall those days of, playing around at Legoland. So that was a lot of fun. A great tradition that we have imparted to our offspring, who are now in their 20s and in college, is just family game night. Simple as that. We love having family game night. It was perhaps the one and only time that we could really get together and willingly, well, I say willingly, but perhaps it was just expected and understood that this was something that we're doing. And it was just such a great opportunity to connect as a family and be focused in the moment on playing a game, just something as simple as playing a game and being silly and stupid and trying to agitate one another or otherwise, educate each other about. One of my favorite games is called Balderdash, where you try to create a definition for an obscure word that most people or some people may not know. And that was just a lot of fun. And of course, we played a lot of other games. They genuinely are more like, I don't know if I would characterize them as like thinking games, but they're not just pure luck or chance. There was some thought involved. Like Quirkle was another one. Apples to Apples. Some were fairly simple, but game night, just where all you're doing is putting aside everything else that's going on outside in the world and just having some silly fun and connecting as a family. So that was really important. And we really have embedded that into our children, I think, in terms of the importance of having those types of moments. So that is it. Thank you.
Happy Father's Day, all. My name is Scott Sutton, and I'm here to tell you a dad story. My dad's name is Bruce, and yesterday marked 2 years since he left this earth, so it's a good time to keep his memory alive with a story. My dad was happiest when on the road. We had many road trips as a young family, and we usually had our pets along with us in the car. The games we played, like the license plate game, and the songs we sang were a tradition that was carried into my family's road trips. In my family, we had a Honda van towing a tent trailer named Tug and a dog named Rox. The songs we sang were many, but one that stuck was Bongo Bong, sometimes called King of the Bongo. I remember my dad would find unique restaurants to eat at on road trips, usually small mom-and-pop places out of the way. He set up the tradition of enjoying the journey as well as the destination, and this tradition was passed down to my adult kids, and now they enjoy road trips independently with friends. I'm sure that special songs and unique vegetarian restaurants are on the docket during their sojourns. So here's a Papa's Day toast to special and safe road trips this summer.
Well, thank you to all of you menfolk who participated in the Father's Day episode. What a great collection of stories, of memories with Dad, those special moments that we take with us our entire life, right? I mean, we do. There's no doubt about it that we all have a memory with our dad, every single one of us. And sometimes those memories fill us with joy, and sometimes they can pass on traditions. Of course, there are hurtful ones too. We get that. But I'd kind of like to think about the ones that meant something special and the ones that filled us with love and filled us with joy. Look, being a father is tough work. Look, I get it. I'm a dad myself. And if you're not a father out there, I know that you might think about your dad and the work that he did, doing the best he can. And listen to all those different stories, right? Just different memories of a pop trying to make a good memory for their kid. Being a father is not all there is with being a man. Our menfolk journey is more than just fatherhood. It's manhood, it's sonhood, perhaps grandfatherhood. Come on, we're lovers, we're friends, we work, we do other things besides being a dad. But there are very few things that are so impactful as those moments with our father. We all think about them. And hopefully, we can be inspired so that we can be the best that we can be. And we can be the best man we can be, even if we're not a father. But if you're a father, learn from your pop. Try to do right by him and try to do right by the next generation and right by everybody else. Anyway, personally, Dad, I love you. Thank you. Happy Father's Day. Wyrd bit araed.